What is going on, everybody? It is another episode of the 5280 podcast. As you can tell, it's a little bit different tonight because there is no Mundungus in the house. There is no Glenn Hauser in the house, and that is actually because Mundungus is at a graduation for his daughter. So congratulations to them. And Glenn, unfortunately, he's feeling under the weather. I think his sinuses are acting up a little bit. And he could not make it. So we are certainly wishing him all the best and a speedy recovery so that he can be back. Both he and Nuggets can be back for Tuesday's show next week. But, you know, to each their own, I guess, right? And that now leaves us, Gage, the younglings, the youngsters of the 5280 podcast to lead the charge here tonight. How are you doing, buddy? You doing good?
I'm doing good, man. Same cannot be said for the Denver Nuggets, though. No. Last night, we saw an effort from that team that I don't think we've seen in pretty much their entirety of these last two playoff runs. I feel like the Minnesota Timberwolves are a defensive juggernaut. They dominated Denver offensively last night as well. It was not a good performance by them. These last 2 years, I've really started to get into the sport of basketball. I've been really following the Denver Nuggets this year, and this is probably the worst effort I've seen from that team in that entire time.
I was there. I was there in person, witnessing it. And if I wanted to watch something that embarrassing, I would turn on the Super Bowl 48 with 43-8. If I really wanted to truly watch something that embarrassing, it was pitiful. It was disgusting. The effort level was not there. They didn't have any sort of defense, like whatsoever. I mean, you know, you got to certainly give credit to Minnesota. They punched them in the mouth consistently, even in the very beginning, and they had no answer. And there are some things to certainly be said about, you know, the refs, you know, in that game, you know, for sure. But, you know, at the end of the day, you take it out of the refs' hands, you have to, you know, win games beside of that. I mean, football games, you know, there's times where calls certainly don't go your way, but, you know, you have to win, you know, you have to win in spite of that. And it never materialized. I mean, Jokic was passive. Murray was not himself at all. The one person you could definitively say that was the best in that game and carry that entire team was Aaron Gordon. Like,
I agree.
And I don't even think that you even have to be a strict basketball fan to know that, like, Aaron Gordon was truly the one who was the best player on the floor for the Denver Nuggets, you know, in a game that, you know, in a game like that. And too, like, Gage, like, Anthony Edwards was kind of non-existent at times, like, you know, in the game. But the reason why was because, you know, Karl Anthony Towns was just the superior player, you know, in that game yesterday. And yeah, it was very, very frustrating. And as I tweeted last night, it was the famous meme of the guy at the Kansas football game where he's holding up the sign that says, "I am sad." That is literally me. I am sad.
Yep. I think the entire city of Denver was sad after that performance. It was completely and utterly embarrassing, but hats off to the Minnesota Timberwolves. They have built a juggernaut of a basketball team that can truly go all the way, I feel like.
Yeah, it truly feels like the Denver Nuggets of last year in the sense that they're the team of destiny, it feels like, right? That it almost feels like maybe they're the team of destiny. Well, Gage, the other thing I will say that is sad is we are still talking about Russell Wilson and the Denver Broncos.
Oh my God. I thought we had moved on from Russell Wilson. Seriously.
Like what's out now? Like, what is this whole thing that's come out now with Russell Wilson and the Broncos?
So, a report was rehashed from Zach Seegers over at Let's Talk Broncos. First of all, big shout out to them. They are building the next big Denver media empire over there. But it was Aditi Kinkhabwala appearing on, I can't recall the name of the podcast. It was a Cleveland Browns-centric podcast. And she basically enlightened the world on some of the struggles that the Denver Broncos had with Russell Wilson last year. They had to dumb down the verbiage of the offense so much that it was basically 2-word play calls, and the entire rest of the offense had to know the entirety of the play call, where Russell Wilson just basically had to know the 2-word verbiage calls. Then there were also issues with snap count and cadence. Sean Payton complained about that in earlier instances in press conferences in the offseason. There were issues with Russell Wilson spinning out of the back of the pocket, which we all saw. Anybody who watched the Denver Broncos last year could see that. It doesn't take a trained eye to spot that. And there were other issues as well that ultimately led to Sean Payton saying that I don't want this guy near my locker room. I'm going to pay you millions upon millions of dollars. And Aditi Kinkhabwala said there is a very, 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 I counted 8 varies in that sentence, valid reason why Sean Payton is paying Russell Wilson millions upon millions of dollars to not play for him, because he can no longer work with a quarterback of that caliber.
There's a lot to unpack here because, let me actually preface it this way. None of it's stuff we, haven't heard before. It's not like it's new information, right? Like you already went into it. Like it really isn't new information. In fact, really, for me, I feel like the biggest question for me, though, given this whole, unpacking again from this report, is Hackett was maybe the biggest problem, but it wasn't the problem, or maybe one of the other biggest problems of that. Because Hackett didn't help matters in terms of the chemistry between either of them, and there was a reason why, at least in that year, Russell Wilson wore the football band and everything, right? Like there was a reason why he wore that, was because of the verbiage and everything, new head coach and everything. Like there was a reason why he did that, right? However, why do I say that again? Because, and to be fair, like it's another new head coach for sure, but when you're having trouble hearing the verbiage and hearing the plays, and you have to have snap count, in essence, basically retaught to you. I know that sounds really bad, but almost like retaught to you, if you will. That's a very bad look for Wilson. And as a 30, soon to be 36-year-old quarterback, and possibly Hall of Fame quarterback, that's a really bad look for you. And, and it's something that, like, I think that kind of report that comes out is, so much of it is like Nathaniel Hackett may have been the biggest problem, but he wasn't the problem. And I think that's like the biggest thing that you want to maybe actually like look at it from, is that Russell Wilson was a root cause of that. I think the other part of that is just how much also Russell did actually play well, in the sense of, like, despite all of that, like Russ did play well in spite of that, in the grandiose of things, right? But still, though, it was not enough, and at the very end, it just became the total confirmation of everything that we knew.
It proved unsustainable.
Mm-hmm, exactly. At the end of the day, it proved to be unstable, unsustainable, right? Both of those.
Yep.
And at the end of the day, the Broncos, particularly Sean Payton, and actually I should say, from just the overall landscape of the Broncos as a whole, having the ownership group, especially, and George Payton, the two members of people that were huge proponents of the Russell trade / extension, be huge proponents of moving on from him. That should tell you also about the need to move on from that. And, and that they were very, very content with allowing Sean Payton to mold the roster how it should be. And frankly, that's how it should be.
Yeah. And I want to give some fans a little bit more insight on the play call verbiage and the snap count stuff, for example. In Sean Payton's offense, play calls can get upwards of 20, 25 words. And it's all tied to the initial formation. If there's a shift or a motion to a new formation, you have to take that into account as well. Then you have to take into account the protection, the route concepts, and then the snap count. And then the snap count is a completely different issue within itself, because there are different snap counts that are tied to different motions and different shifts, all that kind of stuff in Sean Payton's offense. Russell struggled with that big time. It was the first time in his entire career that he had to get used to different cadences, different snap counts tied to motions and that kind of stuff in that type of offense. He wasn't used to that kind of stuff really in Seattle, and definitely wasn't used to it here in Denver. He used basically one cadence his entire career. And then when you go back to like the play call stuff, for when you hear it in the helmet, sometimes that helmet will get cut off at the 15, or it does get cut off at the 15-second mark. And sometimes you can't get that whole play call out if you're Sean Payton, and you're relying on Russell Wilson to memorize the rest of the play call and fill that information in the huddle. He struggled with that. That's why they had to first go wristband, which has the whole play call spelled out for you. And apparently he still struggled with that. So he had to go to 2-word code words for the play calls. The fact that we had to go from Sean Payton's 25-word play calls to 2 words, and we had the wristband in between, and then we had the cadence issues to go along with that. This is day one install stuff that I think it's a good transition into our next topic with Bo Nix, because I don't think Bo Nix is going to struggle with this stuff, the cadence stuff, the shifts, the motions, the long play calls. Bo Nix seems to be at an advantage with that stuff. That's why Sean Payton was comfortable and confident taking him at 12 overall. I think that is some of the information that Bo Nix was thrown at, that got thrown at Bo Nix during his time with the Broncos in Eugene.
And I tell you that is such an important thing, because I mean, like, how many times, not just in the Hackett era, and granted that was somewhat on Hackett, that was also on Russell Wilson, right? Like, how many times do we see it in not just the Hackett era, but the Payton era with Russ, where they are getting out of the huddle, and yeah, they counted down the play clock in the Hackett era, but like even in the Payton era, there were a handful of games where there were situations where the play clock was going down to 5 and they were just getting set. Like that alone is recipe for, not success. Let's just say that. It's not recipe for success. And you brought up Bo Nix. If anything, that this should give Bronco fans hope that Sean Payton has officially picked his guy. And I mean, I don't know how else we can certainly phrase this. I know that the Knicks at 12 pick has been scrutinized and, and criticized ad nauseum already. But I'm sure, you feel the same way about this too. It's like, sure, we can maybe talk about maybe it was a reach in the sense, but because that may be a conversation, but the moment you take a player at 12, and sure, he may have been quarterback 6, right? At least based on how the board went. Tell Sean Payton if it was truly quarterback 6. He was not. He was not quarterback 6 for Sean Payton. I can tell you that. He was the third quarterback. That's by all accounts and all reports that we've been hearing is that he was the third quarterback for Sean Payton, behind Jaden Daniels, by the way, who a lot of people felt like actually was not going to be a fit for Sean Payton. Just keep that in mind. About Jaden Daniels and Caleb Williams. Like, the fact he was below that tells you enough about how confident he was with Nix and taking him at 12. And believing in that process, right? Believing in the fact that he's that ultimate processor. It's one of the things that we've always said so much in terms of this Knicks selection is that should give Bronco fans hope, because now you're allowing yourself to at least trust this quarterback in pre-snap protection, pre-snap motion, as far as even identifying reads, throwing into the middle of the field, throwing into, down the field, taking necessary shots at times down the field. So much of the Russell Wilson stuff, like, take the report now out of it now, and you just look strictly for Russ. The shots down the field, something he was a big proponent of, and dubbing down the entire offense was who was the leading receiver of targets, Gage, for the majority of Russ's Broncos career. It was the running backs. That's not going to be the case at all with Nix under center.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Nix is going to spread the ball around. He's going to efficiently distribute the ball over the middle of the field in the short and intermediate area. That's where the Broncos really struggled with Russell Wilson. If you just look at the deep middle of the field, like just attacking on like post routes and stuff like that, Russell was solid at that. He's always solid throwing the deep ball. But attacking the underneath stuff, especially in the area of these Vic Fangio too high shells, where they're essentially saying, we are not going to allow you to throw the ball deep downfield. We're going to take all of that stuff away. You're going to have to survive in the short to intermediate game over the middle of the field. If you think about the Miami Dolphins game, the Dolphins spammed that area of the field with Tyreek Hill, and that was one combined with obviously our putrid run defense in that game. Those were the two things that really slaughtered us in that game. That is something that I think we're going to see a lot more of with the Denver Broncos with Bo Nix. He's going to be able to take that first read on a crossing route off play action. He's going to be able to throw a slant route. That's something we barely saw with Russell Wilson, was an efficiently executed slant route. Hell, we barely saw efficiently executed screen passes last year. There's an element of the quarterback's footwork and timing with a screen pass that we really, really struggled with last year. That's all going to be back. We're going to be executing an NFL level offense next year. And that alone should make us an above average unit on that side of the ball.
One of the other things too that I feel like is going to be so exciting in terms of even rolling into the draft class even more is this idea of operating in space. And I feel like, I know Sean Payton in terms of coming out and saying that he would love to run the football as much, but part of me, and help me out, and we just talked a little bit about it as far as, Nix and spreading the ball around. I had this thought within the last week, and if I brought this up last week, and I'm bringing it back, I apologize, but Gage, maybe we're looking at this the wrong way. Maybe we're actually looking at it in the wrong way, where a vast majority of this offense will be operated out of the shotgun, and he will spread the ball around. Too much of the same-ish offense that we saw from Drew Brees, right? I mean, Drew Brees, a majority of the time, was in shotgun. I mean, there are some times where he was under center a few times, but a vast majority of the time he was in shotgun and spreading the ball around. And I'll tell you, if there's one thing that is a big proponent of teams that absolutely torture the Broncos, are teams that you and I have mentioned, and even on the show, they need to model their entire game after, and that is speed, 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 speed. I would not be surprised. I think people maybe are reading too much into, and it's the reason why I bring up another draft pick. I think people are reading into too much of the Troy Franklin is Marvin Mims, and Marvin Mims is Troy Franklin situation, because when you have an offensive speed, you have not just one person with speed, but another person with speed. So now at that point, you're also talking a much better wide receiving core, which, by the way, according to Pro Football Focus and the entire stat book that's out there of offensive line, receiving core, and supporting cast, guess where Denver ranked? 11th. They ranked 11th in terms of supporting cast. That tells you it's a lot better than what it used to be. And the additions of Josh Reynolds and Troy Franklin are a prime example of that. So if you can spread that ball around and get it to your playmakers in space, maybe we're looking at it wrong in terms of maybe this offense, in the sense maybe they do want to run the ball, but as you said, I think they want to spread it and really become that speed-oriented team that Detroit is and Houston is, and obviously maybe Miami.
Well, and again, those are the three teams that absolutely destroyed Denver last year. That is what the direction of the NFL is trending towards right now. I think what Denver still lacks is that, well, I can't even really say they lack that speedy tight end if that's what they want to do with that position, because Greg Dulcich and Lucas Kroll would fit if they want to go more 5 wide, utilize the tight end in more of a slot receiver role. just a true modern pro spread look. And I think we're going to see a lot more of getting the ball in the hands of Troy Franklin, Marvin Mims on swing routes off of orbit motions, for example, or wide receiver jailbreak screens, little stuff like that, just to get the ball into the hands of those playmakers. And that alleviates some of the concerns with Troy Franklin's deficiencies that I have, because I can see them utilizing him in that role and him excelling at it. Just get him in, get that ball into his hands, get him space, get him blockers ahead, and just let him go fast.
Yeah, and I think that's why within the last couple days and the last couple weeks, I've been kind of like looking at it in the sense like, well, maybe we're looking at it a bit wrong. Like maybe we're looking at it a bit wrong in the sense that, yeah, Troy Franklin might be a Marvin Mims, or Marvin Mims might be a Troy Franklin, but what's so bad about having, a Troy Franklin or Marvin Mims, especially for a team that is in dire need of playmakers, right? And you touched on it. The tight end position is something that it's such a fun conversation because, and it's a big if, but the Broncos haven't added to the room. So if Greg Dulcich is healthy, and, that's the part of me where, yeah, you're cautiously optimistic, and he certainly needs to be healthy in 2024, because he certainly couldn't maybe necessarily not be in the Bronco plans going forward. So he's going to need to be healthy, but maybe there was actually a good thing for him not to be featured, last year, especially with an offense that was certainly, they needed a tight end to help spread the field, but with the offense that they run, it was predicated solely off of running backs out of the backfield. This particular offense, at least from where things are going, I don't know about you, Gage, but I would much rather prefer a Lucas Kroll and a Greg Dulcich in this type of situation, versus, Dulcich and even Kroll to the situation we had last year. So much so that we don't have to watch the repeats of, game going down to the wire and chucking the ball up to Lucas Kroll as the game, as game is getting ready to wind down. We don't need to watch that anymore.
Oh, I already knew what you were going to say there, and that just gave me PTSD, dude. I flash back to that game in particular, and it just, oh my God, that was the game that you knew the formula last year was not going to be sustainable. And that's when you knew that they had to retool their entire philosophy on offense. And that's what they're doing this year. And it all started with getting a quarterback to fit said philosophy.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be very interesting to see how also the UDFAs roll into this, right? The UDFAs roll into this. Let's start first with probably one of the most obvious ones. Let's start with, one that is going to be garnering maybe the most attention, and that is the running back position, and the running back necessarily of Blake Watson. He's fun, isn't he?
He is very fun. He is very fun, dude. He's another one of those guys that you get him the ball in space and he can be a playmaker. But even as a running back, dude, I really, really like his game. He compares a lot to Jaleel McLaughlin for me. He does.
He definitely does for me. But I will be completely honest. I think that if you were to look at just maybe prospects and running backs that are currently on the roster that probably exemplify more of probably what the Broncos want in terms of the Alvin Kamara role, right? That is something that is going to be mentioned a bunch of times. Blake Watson is probably that type of running back, right? Watson is going to be that type of running back where you're going to see him out of the backfield. You're going to see him, be utilized possibly at wide receiver. I think that the thing, and this is, as much as I know I was on social media and everything with, where I was tweeting about, how it was possibly reading maybe that Samaje Perine and Javonte Williams, what it could mean for them. Frankly, Audric Estime is the one that probably triggers it more for either Samaje Perine or Javonte Williams. But it pains us, right? It pains us that a guy like Watson, you hate to piss off Broncos country, but it really makes you wonder. It really makes you wonder what it means for a guy like a Jaleel McLaughlin, because the one thing that just really is a separator for me from what I'm seeing versus Watson and McLaughlin is he truly can be used as a wide receiver. And that just goes back to his background of, in college when he was at Dominion, he was a wide receiver, with Dominion before converting, to be a running back. And he's actually got a far more size to him too. And he's got incredible balance, right? I think that Jaleel, he's got balance, but he doesn't exactly have the balance to a degree of like, a Blake Watson, I don't think. But I think that where it really gets interesting is the vision, right? And how well they separate there. But I think for you and me, the true separators are going to end up being pass protection and possibly some extra value on special teams.
I would totally agree with that. That's what this coaching staff is going to value. That is why Jaleel McLaughlin at times was in the doghouse last year, because he struggled in pass protection. And at a smaller size, which Blake Watson also is, you're naturally going to struggle there. But it's all about mentality and physicality as well. If you feel like you can physically dominate your guy, even though he's almost twice as big as you, just from a frame perspective, you can get your pads underneath, and I think he can still be an effective pass protector at that size. It's just all about having that dog mentality. Not saying that Jaleel doesn't, but we're going to find out if Watson has that at the NFL level. But I think that if he can be an efficient route runner, splitting out as a slot receiver, being utilized as what Sean Payton likes to term a joker, then I think that might spell bad news for a Jaleel McLaughlin. However, I do almost wonder if Jaleel is somebody they could sneak under the radar and get onto the practice squad and keep everybody in the room. I don't know if there would be another team out there that would have seen enough from Jaleel to poach him necessarily, but that's always a danger whenever you expose somebody to the waiver wire like that. The Broncos are going to have to make some tough decisions come cut time if Jaleel McLaughlin and Blake Watson both play well.
Yeah, that they are. Let's move down the list. Alec Mock, another local kid, is in the roster. Actually, they added a couple Memphis guys. So it was Blake Watson. Then they added a Jalen Allen, the edge rusher for Memphis. We'll continue down this list. We'll break down a few of the ones we feel like are deserving to talk about. UTSA Brandon Matterson, an interior defensive line. Tight end, right? We recently were talking about Lucas Kroll, Greg Dulcich. Georgia Tech tight end Dylan Leonard is one. Jordan Miller was one of the people that were highlighted by Eric Galco recently on Twitter, as far as possibly being one of the more underrated players maybe on that undrafted free agents list for the Broncos. Jordan Miller, Lavelle Bailey from Fresno State, Thomas Yasmin from the University of Utah, Frank Crum as far as an offensive tackle from Wyoming. That certainly was a really popular name because I feel like a lot of people were wondering if he actually had that opportunity to be drafted within probably that 5th to 7th round. He actually did not end up getting drafted. And so the Broncos were able to take him. Lincoln Victor, another wide receiver from Washington State. It certainly seems like a friend of the program, Patrick Coyote, is really high on him. Purdue safety Cam Allen. And it looks like there is a punter of Nick Constantino,
I think is what he said.
Yeah. So
and I looked that one up.
And then of course the two Nebraska players, Omar Brown and Quentin Newsom. It's probably worth mentioning though that there were a couple rookie minicamp tryouts, right? So there were Camden Lewis from Oregon, Fresno State's long snapper, D'Ambra, Colorado School of Mines, Quarterback John Matacha, Joe Bryson, the offensive line from UIW, BYU corner Eddie Heckard, Jacob Likes, the center from Memphis. So that's 3 people from Memphis. Colorado State offensive lineman Jervis Oliver, and Oregon State interior defensive lineman Joe Golden. And actually, don't quote me on this, but I think they added a player from Montana within the last couple hours or so as well.
Yeah, I saw that. He's going to be one of those rookie minicamp tryouts.
But as far as some of those names that we mentioned, what are some of the ones that are kind of catching your eye?
Yeah, so I definitely think Jordan Miller, the defensive tackle out of Southern Methodist, I think that he's got a potential shot to make it. He's your true NFL nose tackle. So the Broncos could be looking to solidify that interior defensive line even more. So he's one guy I naturally think of. I kind of think that he's got a better shot over a guy like Brandon Matterson, just considering the pedigree of Jordan Miller. And I think that overall his game could translate better to what the Denver Broncos need. And then the 2 tight ends, of course, Leonard and Yasmin. The Broncos need playmakers at that position. Talking about the role that we envision for tight ends, I think that possibly Thomas Yasmin could fit that role as another one of those playmaking tight ends. A very intriguing player out of Australia. I believe he spent 6 years at Utah and didn't see a whole lot of playing time though. So that's one thing. He's got a lot of time at Utah, just didn't see the field a whole lot. And then I know you're going to want to gas up the 2 Nebraska guys, Omar Brown and Quentin Newsome. So I think you should maybe give the fans the lowdown on Brown and Newsome. I asked you for a lowdown in our private text thread on these 2 guys, and I'm curious what you have to share about those 2 guys.
Well, before diving into it on my vantage point, what was your takeaway first? Like, what? Because I gave you a little bit of the lowdown. So from an outsider perspective, what at least kind of caught your eye initially before I kind of dive into it?
Well, I think Omar Brown is kind of one of those guys that could be versatile a little bit, both as a slot corner, as a safety. You said Nebraska utilized a 3-3-5 last year. Yeah. I did not watch a whole lot of Nebraska football except for when they played CU last year. So yeah. I think this is one that you're probably a little bit more akin to answering. But again, I think that Omar Brown, just given his versatility, both as a safety and as a slot guy, could be somebody on the radar for the Broncos.
Yeah. And I think that's what makes this fascinating, because I think Quentin Newsome, he's twitchy. That's where I kind of like this, because he and Abrams Drain are actually somewhat similar. They really are somewhat similar. I think the thing that is a bit, if you were to say maybe an edge for Newsome over, over a guy like, Drain, is his height. I think Newsome is about 6'1" or so, like 6'1", maybe 6'2" or less on the 6'2" side. But he's like I said, he's twitchy, he's instinctive, he's definitely got some athleticism to him. So I think it's pretty clear that at least going into this, they're kind of looking at it in the sense of like maybe they're looking at it in a dime backer situation. And we talked a little bit about it, but I think that the Abrams Drain she's probably going to end up competing for the dime backer situation. I'm wondering, certainly what it's going to entail. I think that, he's not a Lamar Jackson. I'll tell you that. Quentin Newsome, he's a little bit more into it. I think one of the drawbacks with a guy like a Lamar Jackson,
I think it's noteworthy here, and Lamar Jackson, the DB,
right? Lamar Jackson, the DB. There were some questions coming out of the Senior Bowl, and actually I heard this from a person that I talked to. He was kind of taking some plays off. He was inconsistent, and you just were really unsure if he was really with it, right? You were unsure if he was really, really with it. And I think that you really don't have to worry about that as much with a guy like Newsome. But yeah, I think you mentioned it for a guy like Omar Brown. That's where I really feel like it's going to really maybe give him the edge is he's got that versatility. He's got that versatility, and I think that from where he is and the instinctual aspect that he has and the smarts that he plays with, he's got also incredible size too for being a defensive back and safety. So I'm very curious to see what he does. And that's one of the reasons why I like the 3-3-5. I don't know what the future holds in the NFL for the 3-3-5, but I love the idea of the 3-3-5 in college because it uses your athletes so much more than typical defenses do, like a 3-4 or a 4-3, or, like some of those typical defenses that you see in either the NFL or whatever. So like, I love that. I love the idea of something like that. And I think that you also get a much better vantage point in evaluating players, with a defense like that, because you get a chance to see more athleticism from them. Mm-hmm. But yeah, another guy that I feel like, is certainly noteworthy if we're going to be talking about, tight ends. Thomas Yasmin. It's worth bringing up Thomas Yasmin. He's a sneaky tight end. I mean, he's not your Dalton Kincaids of the world. He did come from that same university, but he's definitely one where I know they brought in Vele, right, from Utah, but to that same kind of mold sounds wrong, Gage, but it feels a little bit like there's somewhat of the same mold a little bit, Vele and Yasmin. So I wonder if maybe the Broncos are actually kind of looking at it. I'm kind of wondering in the sense of, do they view it in the sense of like a Johnny Wilson situation? So people that don't know, like Johnny Wilson was, like in terms of like looking at it from just the overall perspective of Wilson, people are wondering, okay, is he a wide receiver or is he a tight end, right? Maybe the Broncos are looking at it in the opposite direction of like, well, maybe they're looking at it from like the big slot perspective. I know that's been a conversation with Vele, but like Yasmin, like I'm kind of curious to see what it is in their, for their plans.
I totally agree. I was thinking about a big slot role for Thomas Yasmin. He's somebody who has that size, has that athleticism. We don't exactly know what he is as a football player, but we know that he's a damn good athlete. So if he is utilized as sort of that big slot playmaker, I think he could thrive given his size and his athleticism. And seeing how the Broncos might want to operate offensively, like we talked about earlier in the podcast, they might envision their tight ends as big slot receivers. They might actually split them out in more 3x2 sets where the tight end is just basically acting like a quasi slot receiver. They did that with Greg Dulcich in training camp last year before he got injured in week 1. I think that was going to be their long-term vision and goal. So accumulating more of those players with that type of build with guys like Yasmin as well as Vele, I think you're kind of hedging your bets a little bit on maybe one of them panning out into that role for you, because I envision them as two very similar roles, considering how we talked about the Broncos maybe wanting to utilize that position this year.
Who's before we take another dive on maybe another player, but who's another player that maybe catches your eye?
Yeah, so I think also Jalen Allen, the Memphis edge rusher. I think just adding another body into that edge rush room could be very, very interesting. And then Frank Crum, the Broncos adding a somewhat local kid out of the University of Wyoming. He's got really good size. I think he could be a really solid tackle at the NFL level. He'll probably compete with Alex Palczewski to maybe be one of the swing tackles this year for the Denver Broncos. I think that Crum actually has a really good shot of making the roster, probably a better shot than some of the other guys on this list, just because of the Broncos' possible future needs at tackle, with Garrett Bowles possibly on his way out here pretty soon. And then Mike McGlinchey, we still have question marks about how well he's going to play. The Broncos have some maybe not direct needs at tackle, but indirect needs. And I think that Crum could be a developmental player who could solve that. problem down the line.
And at least in the right now, the Broncos have an extended Garrett Bowles, right? And so, and it's a conversation to be had. And they also didn't draft an offensive tackle once again in a class that is very rich and deep with offensive linemen. They chose not to. They chose not to. And and shout out to Mike Kliss, who's been on the 5280 podcast before, and mainly Broncos. That he's been, when he puts his content out on 9 News, he's actually been rather strong in terms of his commentary with Alex Pavlovsky. They really like Pavlovsky a lot, and if there's one thing that Peyton really likes is development, right? And I think for the Broncos, in just terms of maybe long term, that should give you hope for every single person on this roster. And Pavlovsky, who knows what it's going to be like for a year or two. You and I talked a little bit about it from last year's perspective. Like, no, he wasn't going to start, but like there were times where you were possibly even having conversations of like, Pavlovsky being maybe one of the better tackles, that they were, looking like, in training camp and possibly even preseason before he got hurt. So Pavlovsky's got that talent. You add Crum into the mix, and then of course, not to go too much with the Dalton Risner and local ties, but like it matters. Like it matters when you have local ties like that with Crum, when you're playing for your local school, if you will, that you've been rooting for. Like it burns in your blood that you want to play really well for your franchise, right? And so like for Crum, he's got that athleticism. He can move quite well. And I mean, even Daniel Jeremiah talked a little bit about him, at the NFL Combine. He got an NFL Combine invite, so like it really felt like maybe the Broncos were looking at it from the vantage point of, they're trying to build up also about as much depth as they possibly can, right? And so I think that they added Matt Peart, right? They added Matt Peart within the the swing tackle mold. They brought in Mustafar, to quote Star Wars, Mustafar, for center depth. They also brought in Throckmorton. So they really have addressed, as much as it may not have been sexy by any means, they clearly have brought in more bodies to this offensive line this offseason.
Yes, absolutely. I highly encourage you to go look up Frank Crum's 40-yard dash. It is fantastic. He ran a 4.9 440, locks a flowing. The dude was clearly training hard for that. So go look that up. And that's a testament to just how athletic this cat is. And it's not often you see an offensive lineman run a 40 like that. So I highly encourage you guys go check that out. And I think it's a testament to what he could maybe become at the NFL level. I think he may be a little bit too big to move inside to guard. I think he could move really, really well at the guard position. And I just don't think you see that many guards at his height. Let me look up what his height is. I remember it was on the higher side.
Yeah. Also, as we move 6'7", you said?
Yeah.
As we move forward, one of the last things that we were certainly going to talk about, and I saw it in the chat. It looked like Big E was asking about, it was answered. When is the schedule release happening? Well, we actually just recently got word on social media that they will release the schedule next week on Wednesday. Hopefully, and given the fact that that the Mainly Broncos podcast is at 7:30, I would venture to guess that we will know the schedule, right around that point. So we'll probably be doing a schedule by schedule breakdown. Necessarily, for you, that day on the Mainly Broncos podcast. But looking at it from their opponents, Gage, and we quickly kind of get a nice little gander at their opponents. So it looks like it's going to feature a lot of the NFC South and also the AFC North, it appears. So at home, their home opponents are the Browns, the Steelers, the Falcons, the Panthers, the Colts. So they have what appears to be one AFC South opponent with the Colts. So Colts, Chiefs, Chargers, and Raiders, because we all know divisional opponents gets split up a little bit home and away. And away, Chiefs, Chargers, Raiders, Ravens, Bengals, Bucks, Saints, Seahawks again, and then the New York Jets.
That is a very, very tough road slate. Going into Baltimore is never a tough task. Going into Seattle is never a tough task, especially with some of the new history combined with the old history of these two franchises. The rivalry has only been strengthened between Broncos and Seahawks. So I think Denver's going to want to go in there and kind of stick it back to Seattle a little bit after they burned us. Let's just be honest. Seattle absolutely burned us. Then you obviously have Sean Payton's return to New Orleans. That's going to be a highly anticipated game. Would not be surprised if that is on prime time. And then you have your three divisional opponents, which is going to be no easy task. Raiders, we're looking to finally break that curse. We've never beaten the Las Vegas Raiders. The last time that we beat the Raiders was December 29th, 2019 at home. I was there, the last ever game of the Oakland Raiders, and we have not won against them since then. We're looking to break that like we finally broke the Chiefs curse last year. Going to Kansas City, of course, every single year is always a tough task. Loudest stadium. We got the two loudest stadiums in the NFL on our slate this year. And then Cincinnati, that's never going to be an easy task. And then one of the more underrated games I feel like is at the New York Jets. The Nathaniel Hackett revenge game all over again. Hopefully Aaron Rodgers will actually be able to play in this one, and we'll get to have that true revenge competition with Aaron Rodgers, all the crap talking that was going on last year. And then finally, the last road game is at Tampa Bay. Baker Mayfield, Mike Evans. That's always a really, really tough team to play. And I think that that's going to be one that the Broncos are going to have to put forth their best effort. But you compare that to their home slate, and we got some really, really good teams there as well, if you want to take the wheel there.
Yeah. So as I said, on their home slate, you have the Browns, Steelers, Falcons, Panthers, Colts, Chiefs, Chargers, and Raiders. I will say maybe slightly a little bit more favorable, right? Slightly a little bit more favorable. I think one of the things that really tilts it, if you're going to go a little bit on the hard interpretation, right, it would be depending on what the Falcons do with Kirk Cousins, and what will be made, and because we don't know when the schedule is actually coming out. When, right? I guess that's the question: is when are they playing the Falcons, right? Like, when are they playing the Falcons? And so that will be a conversation. Now, as we kind of look at this, Gage, how many primetime games do you envision for this for this schedule? Because I know a lot of people, probably myself included, maybe even yourself, are looking at one game in particular to possibly kick off that week one 2024 season, with them possibly being at home. But how many primetime games would you certainly envision?
Well, with the one that you're alluding to there, of course, would be week one, Pittsburgh Steelers, Russell Wilson's return to Denver. I imagine that the league wants that game early in the season to ensure that Russell Wilson will indeed be the starting quarterback for that game, and Justin Fields will not have taken over by that time. So week one makes the most sense. Monday Night Football makes the most sense. It's probably not going to be the Sunday Night Football. I don't think they're going to put the Denver Broncos on Sunday Night Football week one, but I could very easily envision it being Monday Night Football. So that's one that I think is pretty heavy on the list of being a primetime game that the Broncos could see. And then the other one that I alluded to earlier is Sean Payton's return to New Orleans. That one smells like primetime game, just drama and juicy storyline that whole entire week. That one, Cody Rourke actually released his mock schedule, and he had that one, I believe, as a Thursday night game, or was that a Monday night game? No, he had that one as week 1.
Yeah,
then he had Russell a little bit later on.
Yeah.
So,
which I didn't mind at all.
Yeah, I don't either. I think either one of them could be a fun opening week game. I just think that the Steelers, from the NFL's perspective, okay, we want to make sure that this is indeed going to be Russell Wilson's return to Denver. So I think that just from that perspective alone, it's probably going to be the Steelers week 1. After that, though, I think that it's going to be pretty hard pressed for the Denver Broncos to get any other primetime games because of how they played towards the end of last year, and they kind of fallen out of favor with the NFL. With just how they're being viewed. You know, the Vegas odds makers have the Denver Broncos at like 3rd or 4th worst record in the NFL next year. I don't think that the NFL is viewing the Denver Broncos very kindly. We had, I want to say, 4 primetime games last year. 3 of them were originally scheduled, and then one of them we played onto with the Detroit Lions game. I think it could be a very similar scenario where the Broncos maybe get 2 primetime games out the gate, and then maybe an opportunity to play themselves into primetime later on in the season.
One that is at least guaranteed to be primetime is Thursday. So every single team is guaranteed a Thursday game, right? So I will say they will end up with 3 with the opportunity to be flexed. I will say they have 3 primetime games with one that has the opportunity to be flexed, right? So I will say the Steelers do end up getting, at least for right now, I will say that the Steelers end up getting the primetime game. Whatever that happens, it'll be a primetime game. I do believe and think that the Saints will be primetime. And I think that it always seems like Thursday night always enjoys conference matchups, I feel like, and prioritize conference matchups for Thursday. So I will make the prediction that I say instead of the Chiefs on Thursday night, I will say that we actually will get the Raiders on Thursday night for a Thursday matchup.
Here or in Vegas?
I will say that will actually be in Vegas.
Okay. I still actually think that Denver could have a good chance of winning that game. I really do. This is, I think, one that Sean Payton is looking at. We broke that Chiefs streak last year. We don't want that monkey on our back any longer. You could argue, I don't think you could argue it. Let's just face it. It's fact. The Broncos, or the Raiders, are the Broncos' most hated rival. They are. And we don't want to have this losing streak on our back anymore. So I would totally be down to finally break that on primetime and give the Raiders just a good old-fashioned ass whooping.
Yeah. What about you guys? What else do you guys feel like actually that would be the question. Sports Nonsense and Whiskey chimes in, less than 7 wins next year. I did kind of laugh. I will say, when the sports bettors said 5 wins, right? 5 wins was what the line is right now for the Broncos as far as their win total. They won 8 games. Like, sure, we can, call it whatever it is we want.
After starting 1-5.
After starting 1-5, and you can say what it is that you want, that the 5-game winning streak was fake. You can say whatever it is that you want, but you know what? It happened. You can say whether or not it was fake. It happened, and they were playing their best football of the entire season. It happened, and because of that, they won 8 games. And the reason why they won 5 games was in large part to, Sean Payton. I mean, he was a driving force for that, but kudos is kudos. And Vance Joseph had the defense cooking at a very elite rate. So I don't think it's out of the possibility that, They may not make the playoffs, and I think it's at least safe to assume the Broncos may not make the playoffs. But I think it's at least safe to assume, that 7 wins. And I like Sports Nonsense and Whiskey's, I would venture to guess that 7 wins is your floor for the Broncos this year.
Let's just do it quickly. Let's run through it game by game and just a quick win-loss prediction. Atlanta.
I think right now, again, we're basing this off of like when we don't know when they'll play, but I think right now I will say that that's a loss.
Okay. I'm going to actually say that's a loss as well. Kirk Cousins, I think, is going to have that offense rolling. It all depends, of course, when they're going to play. If they play earlier in the year, maybe they're going to have some more kinks and whatnot. Right. But the same argument could be made with Denver, which I envision them starting Bo Nix. So maybe some of those early kinks. But this is all just based on us not knowing when we're going to play them and all that stuff, like you had said. Carolina, I think we could both agree that's probably going to be a dub.
Yes.
Yep. Cleveland, I actually am going to say dub as well. I think that although they've got a good roster, they have such a questionable quarterback situation right now that that's going to make their overall outlook of their team questionable. And I'm going to say a win against Cleveland at home.
I think that the Broncos continue their winning ways with Cleveland. Maybe not necessarily in blowout fashion. I mean, I guess you could quantify last year's game with the Browns as a blowout. It was certainly the best from offense, defense, complete performance of the year. So I still envision that definitely as a win.
Yep. At Baltimore, I think we all know where everybody's going with that one. That's an L.
Right. That would be an. I will say though, there, and I'm not saying this for Baltimore, but there will be games. There will be games, where the Broncos have a chance to pull out one, as far as an upset. And Baltimore, they signed Derrick Henry, right? They signed Derrick Henry, but we know, at least within the Lamar Jackson tenure, they've been kind of notorious at times to lose a game that they shouldn't. So I would not shock me in the least bit if, the Broncos did steal one there.
And Sean Payton has been a coach that's known for coaxing some of those upsets out of teams like that. So I think that is one that could be a classic trap game for the Baltimore Ravens. Cincinnati on the road, that's another very, very tough ask. I think that one could end up being an L if the Bengals are at full strength with Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, and Jamar Chase. Couldn't think of damn Jamar's name for a second, but obviously they've got their big three on offense. They're really, really solid on defense as well. When they're at full strength, the Bengals are among the top teams in the NFL. Yeah.
So I will say right now that's an L also. So that's what, 2 losses right now, or 3 losses right now with Atlanta.
Yep. Let's see here. KC on the road. I think again, if it's gonna, I think it's gonna play out very similar to last year, where we split with KC, probably win at home, lose on the road.
I agree with that. I think that they will split. I will say though, with what we've seen in the past, the Broncos obviously give not just the Chargers their best, but the Chiefs their very best. And actually, if you're going to play kind of spoiler alert, I think they do split. I think the Chargers and Broncos actually, Chargers and Chiefs, in terms of with the Broncos, I think they split this year.
Yep, I agree. I'm just kind of hedging right now that probably Denver's wins will come at home like they usually do, and then their losses will come on the road, because with the Chargers, Justin Herbert has never won at Mile High. In that era, the Broncos have always taken care of business at home against the Chargers. I think that'll continue. That was going to be the next game, is Chargers at home. So I think I'll probably say a win there. Would you agree?
For the Chargers at home, yes.
Yeah. Chargers on the road, probably again loss. Chiefs on the road, probably loss, or you could flip it however you want to, but we both are going to agree split with Chiefs and Chargers. Raiders, what do you think happens with them?
I'm with Biggie Bronco actually on this one. I think they actually surprise people, and they don't actually just break the record with the Raiders this year. I actually think they sweep the Raiders this year.
I agree.
I think roles are reversed in the sense we thought it was the Chargers last year that they sweep. I think roles are reversed now. I think they actually sweep the Raiders.
The Raiders, at the end of the day, they've made some good moves to strengthen their roster. They still don't have a quarterback. Gardner Minshew is not your long-term solution, and Aiden O'Connell damn sure isn't your long-term solution. Until that happens, the Las Vegas Raiders are not going to compete amongst the best, and I think this is going to be the year that Denver finally gets that monkey off their back. So Raiders both gone. So what does that put our record at right now? I've lost track.
I've lost track too. Anyway.
Oh, well. All right. Well, I got a couple more games to finish it out.
Yeah.
Jets on the road.
Jets on the road might be actually a little bit trickier than the one that they lost both. What's funny enough and ironically enough, Zach Wilson was a starter for both of those. But I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility of the Broncos at least fight themselves within that game. But with it being in MetLife, I think that's going to be an L.
I have to agree. I think that's going to be an L as well. The Jets defense is still a gauntlet. If Aaron Rodgers is healthy, that offense can be sensational. I call that an L. New Orleans.
I actually think they get it. I actually think they do get it. I actually think they get a victory there.
I think that the Saints are going to put forth their best effort. This is going to be one where the Superdome is going to be absolutely ruckus. You could argue that the Broncos are playing at the top 3 toughest road destinations aside from Denver in the NFL with KC, Seattle, and New Orleans. They're going to have to perfect silent snap count. Talking about our cadence issues from earlier, they're going to have to make sure they're on their P's and Q's with their silent snap count in these 3 games. I think that it will be a win, but I think it's going to be a very tough fought win. Could be down to the very last play. I think New Orleans is going to put their best foot forward and play some of their best ball in that game. Seattle on the road, a very interesting one, a tough place to play, but kind of a questionable organization right now with a new head coach and kind of wondering where things are trending with Seattle right now.
I think this is one of those like the Falcons. You don't know when you're going to play them. And also, if it's early on, Russell Wilson's not in the building, but the emotions will be riding really high. And actually, maybe like it won't even matter, when they're playing them. But the emotions will be riding really high, not just from the Seattle side of things, but frankly, it'll ride more from the Broncos side of things because it's just everything that's transpired with Seattle and they really should have won that game. Let's keep a spade a spade. They really should have won that game against the Seahawks. It was not going to be a pretty win, but they should have won that game, and they didn't. And I think that they act as crazy as it sounds. I do think they have a much better chance at beating Seattle this year than they would have in that year that they played them, because especially in that Nathaniel Hackett year, yeah, Geno Smith is not himself, but in the year when they actually needed Geno to be really, really good, he was really, really good. And so as the season was kind of wearing down, that Seattle game actually became one of the better games and tougher games on the Broncos schedule. But this year, and everything we've seen in the last year, Geno Smith is not the same quarterback that he was 2 years ago. So I think that it's a far more likelier scenario. I think that the Broncos find themselves in of actually pulling one out in Seattle than they did a couple years ago. So I'm saying a win.
If they play the same style of football that they played in Seattle 2 years ago, they could very easily come out with a win. Nathaniel Hacketed that game. Let's just be honest here. Attempting a 64-yard field goal rather than going for it on 4th and 5. Establishing trust in your, at the time, franchise quarterback in Russell Wilson. That set the tone for the entire Russell Wilson era in Denver. And I think that the Broncos atone for that, and Sean Payton atones for Nathaniel Hackett, and the Broncos, in a very similar fashion, it's an ugly game that comes out down to the wire, but Denver takes care of business and pulls it out this time.
And instead of Brandon McManus missing a kick, you have Big Nuts Lutz, who actually is the one that's actually kicking the game-winning field goal. And actually, to keep it at least objective, in that game, the Broncos actually had multiple chances to put the ball in the end zone,
yes,
and thus resulting in, a Melvin Gordon and Javonte Williams situation where let's just put it this way, they fumbled away their chances. So I definitely do believe that the Seahawks one, though, is a win.
All right, I got 3 more. Tampa on the road.
I actually think that is a win. Ooh. I think it's a sneaky. That is one game. I will say that is one game where, dependent upon bye week, and granted, it all is relative in a sense, because we don't know when these games are. We don't know when these games are.
Yes.
But the Buccaneers one specifically is when that game is. Right now, I'm saying it's a win because we don't know,
right,
where it is. But I really do think, though, dependent upon where it is, the opponent that follows next, right? The opponent that follows next, that Buccaneers game, I think, is one that I would be eyeballing as a trap game.
Mm-hmm. Let me tell you this. Sean Payton has dominated the Buccaneers over the course of his career.
And a Baker Mayfield fan.
Knows, it's true. But if there's anybody that knows the strengths and weaknesses of that Buccaneers team and the ins and outs of that Buccaneers team and how to dissect them, it's Sean Payton. That is why I am very confident in the Broncos pulling out that game. I think that offensively, Sean Payton knows exactly what Todd Bowles wants to do against him. And defensively, if Vance Joseph and company can at least keep Baker and Mike Evans and company in check, then that is a very, very, very winnable game, even though it's going to be traveling to the East Coast, 2 time zones away. That's always difficult, but I think that one is one that Denver could pull out. This is a very interesting game. Indianapolis at home.
I actually think it's a win because it's at home.
Mm-hmm.
I
agree.
Yeah, if it was on the road, I actually would. I would very much believe, that actually has a very high chance of possibly being a loss.
Yeah, I think that this one could also depend on what time of year it is. If I'm not mistaken, Anthony Richardson has only started 1 road game in his career, and that was at Houston. He still has yet to make a road start in a true hostile environment like Denver is. Let's just be frank. Denver is a very tough place to play when you combine the altitude and the crowd noise and all that stuff. It's up there with the top 2, top 3 toughest places to play in the NFL. So I think that this could be one that if it's earlier on in the season, Anthony Richardson still trying to get his feet wet again after only playing in 4 games last year. This is essentially a do-over of his rookie year. I think that if it's early in the year, give me a win for Denver. But if it's later in the year when Richardson has a little more time to get things settled down and maybe he has like a Jordan Love trajectory where he's kind of hot and cold to start off the year and then mid-season hits his stride and really takes off, that could spell trouble for the Denver Broncos. I think it's all contingent on when they play and how Anthony Richardson is playing at that time.
Absolutely agree. Yeah, absolutely agree.
Last but not least, I saved it for last. Pittsburgh Steelers at home.
I think they do it. I actually think they do it. I will actually be honest on this one. If it was on the road, I actually think it's a loss. just because Pittsburgh is a very, very tough place to play, regardless of who's at quarterback. It's been well documented, even with Mason Rudolph leading the helm, or even when Ben Roethlisberger was there. Like it's always been a rather tough place to play. And Mike Tomlin, believe it or not, regardless of the fact that Russell Wilson is there and Justin Fields is there, they will be a better football team than I think people will give them credit for. And look, I realize we kind of went on a Russell Wilson tangent. Maybe not even a tangent, but we talked a little bit about him at the beginning part of the show. But I will be honest, I think the best thing for Russell Wilson at this particular point in his career, or maybe just in general in his career, is having a player coach like Mike Tomlin. I think that having him be in his ear every now and again, I think will benefit him far more than it will hurt him. And so I think that the Steelers, despite it's a loss, will still find themselves battling 500 and still getting that winning record by season's end because of just how good Tomlin is at coach.
And that's why I actually think this is going to be a loss, because I think that Tomlin's going to have his team extremely well prepared. We had a very similar instance to this last season when Nathaniel Hackett returned to Denver. The Jets were the better prepared team, and they actually outcoached Sean Payton and the Broncos in that game. The emotions were riding high in Denver, and that's when we saw Sean Payton kind of lose his cool a little bit. That was one of the first times we saw Sean Payton yelling at Russell Wilson on the sideline. This is going to be a game that I feel like really is going to test how well Sean Payton handles pressure. I think that we're going to have another big media circus when the time comes for the game. We're going to have a lot more of these reports like the one that came out from Aditi Kikabwala that Zach Seegers rehashed. I think we're going to see a lot more of that as we get closer, and we're going to see just how much Sean Payton can handle the pressure. And if it blows up in their face like it does, like the Jets game did last year, then I think it's going to be a big red flag for this Broncos team.
So now that kind of rounds things out a little bit. Now we kind of lost track, but I think that the win total, I think, would probably put it at the 8-9, 9-8, record, which we said like the 7 wins, and kudos to Nonsense and Whiskey, Sports Nonsense and Whiskey. I feel like 7 is that floor. And then I think 10 is that ceiling, right? 10 is that ceiling because, as we said earlier, there will be a game or two that the Broncos can and maybe even steal. If they can steal a game or two, like if they steal a Chiefs game, right? Which is, well, steal is a very relative term because we said that they're going to beat the Chiefs or split the Chiefs, right? But let's say they do split the Chiefs. If they steal a game against the Ravens or the Bengals, you're talking about a far more likelier scenario. They may get 10 wins or at the very least 9 wins at that point. If they beat the Bengals and they beat the Ravens, well, you're talking about a very good scenario where they probably will end up with 10 because of the fact that they beat both of those teams. And especially because of wild card placement and everything, those are going to be big games if that actually ends up happening.
Yep, and Denver stole wins from playoff teams last year. They stole a win from Green Bay. They stole a win from Kansas City, even though we're projecting that to happen again. They stole a win from Buffalo last year. Those are games that Denver has showed that they play their best ball in those games. If that continues next year, then there are a lot of games on this list that I have as L's that could very easily flip to dubs.
100%. Now, winding down the show on a little bit more of a somber note, we would be remiss if we did not mention that the orchestrator, the orchestrator and the person who led the Orange Crush defense, Joe Collier, passed away. Joe Collier passed away. So our thoughts and prayers are with him. The Orange Crush defense has been a big, memorable, maybe the most memorable for many Bronco fans and older Bronco fans. The Orange Crush defense also finally got its first member into the NFL Hall of Fame with Randy Gradishar. So our thoughts and prayers are with Collier, the leader of the Orange Crush defense.
Yep, absolutely.
And it looked like, and this is actually from actually Glenn. He actually dropped this into our chat. He said that when Lyle Elzado, and this is actually from Andrew Mason, when Lyle Elzado suffered an injury early in 1976 season, Collier changed the Broncos defensive alignment from a 4-3 to a 3-4 to play the strengths of the players who remained, particularly in Reuben Carter, and changed the course of Broncos history once he did that. So the moment he did that is when it truly became the Orange Crush defense that we are certainly accustomed to. Guys like Carl Mecklenburg, Randy Gradishar, Tom Jackson, Dennis Smith, so many others that are very, very strong members and, people that are, that we certainly, really resonate with in terms of just remembering, certainly the impact that they've had on Broncos country or Bronco land. Calista, if you were listening, Bronco land, of course, but again, our thoughts and prayers are with Collier. And thank you, Glenn, for sharing that with us just as before we went live. Any final thoughts, Gage, as we round out the show?
I think we're good, man. I think we covered pretty much everything.
Thank you to everybody that was in the chat. Biggie, Broncos, Sports Nonsense, and Whiskey. Ray, I see you just into the chat just now. It looked like we have D-Rock. I didn't get a chance to see D-Rock earlier. What's up, Muhammad? I saw you in there. Mark from Georgia. I see you in there as well. Again, thank you guys so much for hopping into the chat with us. Make sure you keep up to date with not just the Broncos related content, but any sort of content that is right here on the MHRT network. Obviously, the Nuggets quest for a possible NBA championship is a little bit derailed, but they're not out of it. And we certainly will be doing a neighborhood, right? We'll be consistently doing the neighborhood in terms of their playoff push for possibly winning an NBA Finals. And obviously the Colorado Avalanche will, and their quest for the Stanley Cup is still underway. They advance to the second round where they will play the Dallas Stars. So stay updated to that with also the neighborhood, but also, of course, the Cluster Puck podcast right here on the MHRT network. And of course, as you know, the Broncos related content is also on the MHRT network. And actually the AFC West as a whole is on the MHRT network with the Wild Wild West pod. You got, and of course, with Broncos related content, Broncos Breakdown. You have the Mainly Broncos podcast, which is on Wednesday. Obviously, us with the 5280 podcast on Tuesdays. And if you are just so inclined to hear Gage one more time, you can go out and you can listen to his show as he is the host of the Broncos Syndicate. So make sure you tune into him and follow him on socials, as you see there at Gage Madrid NFL. You can follow myself at Cameron Parker PO. It has been a fun ride, and we will see you, and I will see you tomorrow night for the episode of the Mainly Broncos podcast.
Let's ride.
Fast lane when I pass in the street, bag of money in the passenger seat. Tempo's been asking for me on the road from the west to the east. Way up, I might never come down, cause the coast racking up the flight miles. So high, I might never come down, so what, this is my lifestyle.